recently was part of the Academy Award-winning movie Argo, which was absolutely wonderful. You've worked in sitcoms, Broadway, of course, soap operas, and a voice actor. And a couple books out as well. Of course, the memoir, which obviously all the stories we're going to be talking about this afternoon. And then also, because why not have a romance comedy with vampires?
Yes.
Because that, seems like, a novel idea for a story.
And a vampire who's a scream queen and runs a movie studio.
well, let's open it up with that. Talk a little bit about how that concept came to be.
Okay. Well, I sort of have to go back and tell the story of how I ever ended up even writing a memoir, which is, I never in my life thought that I would add another career at in my 50s. But my older son, Cody, on the first day of preschool for Cody, which would have been probably 88, 89, I met a woman, another mom, whose son became Cody's best friend. And she and I became the closest friends. She was a film editor. And I just loved her to death. We were very, very close friends. And she passed away in 1998 of breast cancer. Well, on the first day of preschool for my twins, which would have been about 2002, a woman came onto campus who looked just like my dead friend. And she looked so much like her that I think I must have paved, because I grabbed onto something to hang on, to keep myself standing. And she said, "Are you okay?" I said, no, I'm sorry. You just look so much like my closest friend that it just was a shock. And she said, "Oh, what's her name? Maybe I know her." I said, "Oh, no. She was a film editor, and she passed away several years ago from breast cancer." And this woman, who looked just like Suzanne, said, "Oh, well, I'm a film editor, and I have breast cancer. We could be best friends." And it was so bizarre that I said, "What are you doing? Let's go have coffee." And we did. And in the course of the coffee, somehow, it was like we sat and talked for 3 hours. She talked about a writer's workshop that she had just attended that was run by a woman who had been on Broadway doing musical comedy about the same time I had been doing fiddler, I think, and who was now teaching writing and had a lot of fairly well-known actors and actresses in her writing class. Tess Harper, Michael Learned, Mariette Hartley, I can't remember the guys. And as soon as she said this, she had a flyer for this woman's class. I thought, this is Suzanne telling me, this is my dead friend telling me that I have to go and take this class. And so I called this teacher up. It turned out she taught classes in her home, which was about a half a mile from my house. I couldn't walk if I wanted to. And we had all this in common because we had both been in New York on Broadway musical stars and all that at the same time. And so I started taking her class. Well, if you're going to take a writing class, you've got to write, and you've got to bring in homework assignments. And so I think the first one I brought in was about, I thought, well, I'll write, about things about my career that I take for granted, but other people might find interesting, being married to John or dating Burt Reynolds, or I think the first piece I wrote was about a film that I did in Moscow called The Burial of the Rats, where I landed in Moscow and the producer picked me up and said, "Well, I don't know if we're shooting because we have civil war. They just fired on the parliament. I don't know if you're going home or we're doing this movie. They declared martial law. I'm taking you to your apartment. You'll just sit there and wait for me." That was the first thing that happened. When we finally got started shooting, I was supposed to be doing this movie with 50 trained rats, and 32 of them were dead, and the other 16, or however many, had been trained to do nothing but eat anything that smelled like fish. So whenever they had a scene where they had to have the rats swarming on me, which is what was happening to my character, they just took fish heads and squeezed them all over my body, and then the rats, swarmed all over me. And I thought, well, somebody might find this interesting or funny. This is low-budget horror film making, for Roger Corman. So that was the first chapter I ever wrote. And after about 6 months of writing about my life, the teacher said, you need to get an agent because you've got a book here. This is a memoir. Got an agent, sold the book, wrote the book became a bestseller. And then an Irish author who had written many, many science fiction, horror, romance novels in the UK approached me and said, this is a great book, but you wrote the wrong book. You should write a horror novel for your fan base at the conventions. And I said, well, I know I can write the characters and the dialogue and the scenes, but I don't know if I can write a story. I don't know, I don't think, I knew the story of my life. He said, we'll write it together. And so we sat down, and he said, well, what do you want it to be? You want it to be like The Fog, or, a horror film, or Escape, you want futuristic, whatever. So, they say, write what you know. So I said, well, let's make her an Armenian vampire who's a scream queen in present day. And we took that conceit, and he sort of he wrote an outline for the first 6 chapters. And we pitched that to St. Martin's Press. And they said, we want that one, and we'll take the second one. And so that became Vampires of Hollywood, which is about Afsana Moore, who is the writer and star of 17 blockbuster horror films and a couple that just went straight to DVD. And she also happens to be the head, the chatelaine of the Vampires of Hollywood, which includes Orson Welles and Mary Pickford and Rudy Valentino and a lot of A-list Hollywood actors. And someone is killing off the A-list Hollywood actors. One of them is found with the Academy Award that he just won, shoved up where the sun don't shine. And it's sort of up to her to try and figure out why people are killing off her clan. And then a Beverly Hills detective comes onto the scene to try and figure out why they're killing off these actors. Nobody else knows that they're vampires. And so that was the conceit for Vampires of Hollywood. We wrote that one. When time came to write the second one, my co-author disappeared, and so I wrote the second one. And that one has just been optioned by the fellow that has Death House coming out. I don't know if any of you have seen the promos for that, and Harrison Smith. Harrison optioned that, and then he and I wrote the screenplay. And with any luck at all, it'll be coming to the big screen next year. And then I wrote the third one, which is available only digitally, for Kindle and ebooks, which I placed in a horror convention. So then I could have, I could get in all the descriptions of what we go through in the horror conventions. So that's my writing career to date.
well, that, and that's just a small, part of your overall career. You basically, it almost started on Broadway after, you are the original Rizzo in The Breeze. Of course, you were in the chorus of Fiddler on the Roof to start. And actually...
And then one of the daughters.
Exactly. And then also worked with a young Bette Midway.
Bette and I shared a dressing room. We both played Tevia's daughters. And John Savage, who then, 20 or 30 years later shows up on Carnival with us. And I actually started my acting career in San Jose. I was in theater. And then went to New York and started on Broadway. And it was the Tony nomination for Rizzo that led to Norman Lear hiring me for Maude, and that brought me to LA and to television. And then it was the television movie with John that led to the feature career. Because when I was doing Maude, when Maude went off the air, but even while we were doing Maude, the Hollywood powers that be would not hire a television actor for features because they felt like the audience wouldn't pay in a theater to see somebody that they were seeing for free once a week in their homes. And it really was Johnny Travolta who was an understudy in the Broadway show, but who was doing Welcome Back, Kotter, who was able to make the transition first, I think, with Saturday Night Fever. And John actually hired me for my first, we did the TV movie together, and then he hired me for The Fog, and that was my first feature. And then ever since then, I bounced back and forth, all three of them, whatever comes along that I think sounds like fun to do.
What was young Broadway like back in that time when you were in Carpenter and Grease? What was that like? Obviously, you've been back, after that. How has it changed over the past?
I haven't been back. I did an off-Broadway show in 2005.
But just
But I don't know how it's changed. What it was then was, for me at least, it was, I was working as an actor. It was what I had set up. I was earning a living doing what I love to do. So I got into Fiddler, and I stayed in Fiddler for 2.5 years because that was my job. It was wonderful. How it's changed.
Or what was New York like back in the late 60s?
Oh, well, then you can read my memoir too. I was working for the mob. I was what was it like back in the late 60s? I lived in the Village, which was before all the cheap shoe stores came in and the pizza parlors. It was sort of artsy, and it was a wonderful place to live. It was a great time.
And then, of course, you're cast in Maude. B.B. Arthur, obviously a great star, a close friend of yours, as I read. And just how iconic that show was, coming from all the family, and then kind of changing television, also changing the role, not only of women television, but also of just the family dynamic.
Yes, I have had people come up to me at conventions and say to me, you had an enormous effect on my life, because up until that show, I still remember what fella saying, up until that show, I didn't know that people could yell at each other and still love each other, because that's not the way it was in my house, and there was just yelling, and I've had men and women come up to me and say, you sort of, it wasn't me, it was my character, but you gave me a blueprint for how to be in the world when women were not standing up for themselves, or I think it had an enormous effect on a lot of people. And I didn't realize how fortunate I was to be in the show until after I left. I knew I loved being in it, but I didn't realize how fortunate I was to work with Bea and the others in the cast, because they were so professional and so committed to doing the work and doing it well. I just took that for granted, because we all came from stage, and you learn your lines, you show up on time, and it wasn't until later when I went off to do other shows that I thought, geez, the star was 2 hours late, and the star's leaving to go, see his shrink, or whatever. She's changing the lines. Those aren't the lines that are written. How can it was a great show to be involved with. I was very, very fortunate, and I was also, even at that time, very proud to be associated with a show that was more than just pratfalls. I mean, there's a place for that in comedy, you know, but we were dealing with issues that affected a lot of people, that touched a lot of people.
Did you talk to B. Arthur, maybe even America more about that, you know, either at the time or a little later about how?
We didn't really, I mean, you know, we didn't talk about it. I ended up, because of the character, the media sort of started looking to me and to B, but in many ways more to me, I think, as a spokeswoman for the women's movement, you know, and for all kinds of issues. And it forced all of us, I think, to examine what our personal attitudes were about the things we were dealing with. When we did the two-part abortion segment, we got a lot of violent, really vicious mail. But we didn't sit around and talk about it. We just did the work.
And specifically about B. Arthur, about her being an actress, about, I mean, I read, you know, how dedicated she was to art. Talk a little bit about that and how maybe that rubbed off on you a little bit.
Well, I mean, I certainly think, even now, whenever I'm, you know, doing a comedy or going into audition for a comedy or something, I hear B's timing coming out of me. I mean, you can't be around someone that's that brilliant for 6 years and not have some of her talent rub off. I don't think I ever have Bill's talent, but his timing, because he had a totally different approach to comedy. But she was a very giving actor. We always, before we started work on that week's script, we would read the script that was going to be filmed the following week so that the writers could hear it and know what needed to be changed and everything. And B was the first one to say, you know, this line would be funnier if Adie were saying it or if Conrad were saying it, or, you know, I mean, she was so giving. It was not about, you know, I'm going to get the laughs and, you know, she didn't suffer fools. If you didn't show up and you didn't do the work, or we had a guest star who was like screwing around, or, you know, she let it be known that she was not happy. But and she had an eidetic memory, I think, so that she could read the words and you know, like photographic memory, she really knew, which came in handy because we did the show like a play. We did it for two audiences. At 5:30, we do it straight through, and then we break for dinner and get rewrites. You know, this joke didn't work, cut that out, let's do this scene here, try this whole run differently. And so we had only our dinner break to memorize it and figure out what the blocking is going to be and all of that before we did it again. And she knew it. She didn't. She was great.
Was that normal for television to do kind of two sets?
In those days, all of the 4-camera, yeah, it was done before a live audience. I think, I couldn't tell you which ones were filmed at that time, but all of Norm's shows were done before a live audience.
And look back at your career, the leading men you've been a part of. Burt Reynolds, Conrad Bain, who was the father on Different Strokes, and Rodney Dangerfield. I mean, that I think is the gamut of sex symbol to. Well, I mean, Rodney was a sex symbol in his own way. But.
Rodney was a real sex symbol. I tell you, I could not believe it when I would get to work in the morning and there were women lined up outside his trailer. I mean, it was like, Rodney, you know, but they were, I mean, throwing themselves at him. I don't know if it was sex or money or what it was, but he had not there was no dearth of women waiting for Rodney.
What was it like working on the set with him? I mean,
I always said that the director of Back to School should have gotten an Academy Award for getting to Rodney to stand still and to deliver at least some of the lines in the script, because Rodney wanted to do his act, you know. He was very funny, and he was great. I mean, he was just a sweetheart. But it was like he'd start going off on a riff that would have nothing to do with the show. And Alan would, Rodney, that's really great. That's really funny. I don't think it works right here. You know, I don't think it works in this scene. But he was fun to work with.
Any questions from the audience?
What do you think the translation from working on stage and then working on something where you could do more of a stage style acting as opposed to film? What's the translation?
It was a hard one for me to learn. I came from having done Rizzo, who was really, in our production, I mean, really a tough chick and a street chick and everything. And from approaching things from a theater acting point of view, the first thing that happened with Maude is I didn't understand that they had hired me because they saw something in me that was what they wanted for the character, an ability to stand up to Bee's character and yet not have the same kind of delivery. And so I showed up and I was going to act, you know, I was going to be Carol. And so if Carol had to get mad, I mean, I was going to, you know, dig down deep and find something that was going to, and it was just too big. It was wrong. It took me a while to trust. Norman was the one who kept saying to me, look, you know, if you don't trust yourself, trust me. I know that you're this character. I know you can do it and everything. And then in terms of film, I really owe a huge debt to John Carpenter. The first scene of Someone's Watching Me that I did with John. Usually when you're doing a TV show, not like a series where we had the same director and we were doing a comedy and we were rehearsing like a play. But, you know, Women Behind, not Women Behind, Diagnosis Murder, Murder, She Wrote, or Fantasy Island, Quincy, I remember. Usually the director on an hour-long drama is a traffic cop. He says, you know, stand here, the camera's going to shoot you here, blah, 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 blah. You don't get a lot of acting direction. I did the first scene for John, and Someone's Watching Me, and he came over and he said, that was great, that was great. Do less. I said, do less? He said, yeah, just do less. Light bulb. Oh, just do less, because you're working for a bigger, you know, I mean, anything you do is exaggerated on film, as opposed to being on Broadway and, you know, hey, how you doing? Yeah, hey, Zuko, you know, it's big. It's, your body is big, your voice is big, your face is big, you know.
Now you speak about Pippin a little bit. You had to train as a circus performer for 2 weeks now.
I had to learn I did the song doing a trapeze act, yeah. It was not hard for me, in part because I've always been sort of a gymnast, you know, I like to work out, and I have dance training, and I don't have much imagination, so the fact that I was up 15 feet in the air with no net, I never thought about it, you know. My sister, on the other hand, was hysterical, but yeah, it was great fun.
How was that different touring with a Broadway touring company compared to being on set at a certain location? I mean, there had been a few differences in touring with this group of people around the country.
Well, the Pippin company traveled with their entire set.
Okay.
So we never had to even do a tech rehearsal. We did a sound check, you know, but before we got there, the entire set, wings, everything, the floor, everything was in place So it was like going to the same theater every night.
So it had to be, like when you first started on Broadway, it had to be much of a family atmosphere, much like...
This was very much a family atmosphere. You're with these people, 24 hours a day. I only did it for about 9.5 months. John Rubinstein, who had played the original Pippin and was now playing Charlemagne, traveled with the company for 2.5 years. One of the differences between doing a tour and doing Broadway is we never had a day off. Mondays was our day off, but that was our travel day. And so you didn't have a show that night, but you got on a plane and you flew to the next town, and then you drove to Whole Foods and bought your groceries because, and then Tuesday we got on the boards. We did 6 weeks in Amsterdam, and that was great because then we didn't have enough off. But it's a different beast.
How did European audiences take to Pippin?
They loved it. It was a different experience for us because even though people in the Netherlands all speak English, the jokes didn't quite fall the same. There was a line that John Rubinstein, as Charlemagne, has when his wife is doing something and she exits and he says, "Sometimes I wonder if the fornicating I'm getting is worth the fornicating I'm getting." And it died in Amsterdam because they just didn't know, So we sort of got used to, the show's going to run about 5 minutes shorter because they're not laughing. They're applauding and they're cheering and they're standing up at the end, but they just didn't get all of the humor.
Do you find yourself now, the number of years you've been in the acting business, helping the younger actors, especially if you're not saying these touring companies or different things that you work, being kind of a mentor?
I try never to give advice unless someone asks. Never. I mean, and most of these kids were so young, and they were most of them were circus performers, acrobats and circus performers, and they didn't know from the fog or any of that. And a lot of them were from Europe and Canada. But I only once said to one of the girls, she was delivering her line upstage and she wasn't getting her laugh. And I finally said, maybe this is how you were directed, but I don't think the audience is hearing, if you try it, I think it'll work for you. And she did. She said, oh yeah, it worked. But, unless somebody wants my advice, I'm certainly not going to push it on them.
Do you think we're working in theater back in the 60s where they didn't have the microphones and now they have the microphones? Do you think that's changed the way Broadway has kind of, or really musicals in general, have been put out to the audience?
I don't know. I don't love watching. I mean, I don't go to the theater very much. I don't watch horror films either, but I don't really know what's going on now. We did have a couple of instances when the mics went out, and that really causes a problem. But when we were doing Fiddler or Grease, we weren't working with mics in those days. You just needed to know how to use your gut and project. I don't know that it changes it that much. It might make it easier for the singers because they're not having to project as much, and they can maybe change the sound a little bit differently. I'm not the person that.
Oh no, I just was wondering that was the one thing that struck me nowadays in theater is the mic aspect,
Yeah.
where they aren't used to talking
Yeah.
without it. And I grew up with theater where you project back.
Right. Right.
Any questions from the audience?
Thank you, Ms. Barbeau, for being here. It's awesome to so happy. And congratulations on the longevity of your career. I'm here from the Maude years. I was a teenager. My son knows my close friend.
Small.
Swampy.
Yeah, so, and I remember Maude and all the family were very impactful at that time. And so thank you for that. It was really incredible. Who was, maybe, of all the famous people that you met and worked with, who was somebody that's really memorable to you, and why? And any story?
Well, I loved meeting Roger Moore, just because I was a little starstruck, you know. And I tell the story in the book. We were on location in Lancaster, which is a desert area outside of LA. And Roger's motorhome, the air conditioning in his motorhome broke down. So he came to sit in my motorhome, and I was just like, oh my God, what are we going to talk about? What are we going to talk about? Because, I mean, he was James Bond, you know, and he was, I have been very fortunate. It's not quite the answer to your question, but to answer in reverse, I think in all the years I've been working, I could only list maybe 5 people that I would rather not work with again. I have been very fortunate. I've worked with just wonderful people, you know. Tim DeKay from Carnival became a very close friend. Tommy Atkins, of course, from The Fog, has been my lifelong friend. And my closest girlfriends are still all actors that were in the original production of Grease. I love Conrad Bain was like my father. When I bought my first house, I bought it, I walked through, I bought it, it still had all the furniture and everything in it. I never saw it again until I took possession of it, and then I walked in and I looked around and I thought, oh my God, you know, what is that on the walls? It's like this, and I called Connie immediately and I said, could you come over and tell me if I've made a terrible mistake? You know, he was my mentor. Conrad taught me how to negotiate. He taught me what my first car, I bought diesel Mercedes because Connie bought diesel Mercedes, you know. Dom DeLuise was very helpful to me at one point. I was doing a play with a very famous actor who shall remain nameless because it wasn't as much fun working with him because he kept ad-libbing and it wasn't on the page and it was giving me a problem as my character. And Dom watched rehearsal one day and he came up and he gave me some very good advice for how to deal with that. And so I have a great affection for Dom. I loved working with Dean, although I never knew what Dean was going to say, you know. Yeah, I've had a really good time.
Is there a part that you maybe turned down that you looked at and you went, oh, that one actually did pretty well?
Well, not in that sense. Certainly in the sense of being at a horror convention. I got a script from some guy named Rob Zombie for this horror film, and I read the first 20 pages, and I called my agent and I said, I can't do this. This is god-awful. This is just so violent and just, ooh, God, I can't do this. And a couple of years later, I think we had already done Carnival, and Bill Moseley was on Carnival. I was at a signing, and Bill Moseley is down the hallway, and there are people lined up out into the street, you know, for Bill. And I walked over, I said, Bill, how are you doing? What's going on? He said, oh, I did this movie called The Devil's Rejects, and that was the one that I had turned down. I'm still not sorry I turned it down. But it did very well for Bill. I was not going to do Creepshow. As I said, I'm not a horror fan, and probably one of the first horror film I ever saw was Halloween, and I've never seen it again, but it was too scary. I just don't like to be scared. But I got the offer to do Creepshow, and of course it was George Romero, who I didn't know, but I was married to John at the time, and he said, "My God, George Romero, the master of horror, you've got to do this movie, you know." But I read it, and again, I thought, oh God, it's so violent and bloody, and no, I don't think I want to do this. But Tom Atkins was already cast as the father in the interstitials, in between the scenes, and Tom is very close friend. So I called Tom and I said, "Tom, you're doing this movie?" And he said, "Oh, Amy, you got it. You're not reading it right at all. It's going to be very stylized. It's going to be like a comic book. George knows what you've got to do it. You're going to, you know." And I mean, it's one of the best things that I ever got involved with. I loved it dearly. You know, I had such a good time. And that was an instance you were asking about the directors. George was the one, and size, you know, by that time I was a film actor, you know, and Billy is big, you know, and George was the one who kept saying, "Go for it, go bigger, you can go bigger, it's okay, go bigger, it'll work." And I thought, well, I'm going to trust him, he's the director, you know, if they say I'm over the top, I do what he wanted me to.
Question to that?
Yeah, I'm a huge fan. Thank you.
Thank you.
I don't honestly, that genre of film, I mean, I don't think anybody would put you in the definition of like scream queen with like Linnea Quigley or Jamie Lee or anything like that. But during that time, did you ever feel like maybe you were getting typecast into that type of role?
I don't remember, and I didn't think about it, and I'm not sure if that term was as common in the early 80s. Maybe it was, I wasn't aware of it. I had been typecast since the day I landed in LA because, first of all, I was a stage actress. Then I was a comedy actress. And if you did, even trying to get my first dramatic role, which was a role on Quincy, I mean, she does comedy. She's not a dramatic actress, you know. So Quincy sort of broke that, and then, you know, and if it hadn't been for John offering me The Fog, I might have been a television actress for them. I think some of the label came because my first film was The Fog, and then because by that time I was married to John, so I was associated with, you know, the Master of Horror. And so then that's the kind of thing I started getting offered. But I never consciously tried to avoid it, and I never consciously, you know, sought it out. And I don't know. I mean, it's what everybody knows from different things. I mean, I have people come up and say, "Oh, you were great on General Hospital," which I never even remember, you know. But so I don't know if I answered your question, but it didn't bother me, certainly. You know, what bothers me now is so much of what I get offered in the horror genre is not something I ever want to be associated with, because the genre has changed, you know. I mean, you guys liked The Fog or Escape or Creepshow or Swamp Thing because there were characters that you got to know before they got sliced, you know, because maybe you weren't seeing the violence on the screen and you were adding to it with your own mind. That was John's certainly that's how John directed, you know. So much of what I get offered now isn't even spelled correctly on the page, you know, the grammar isn't correct. And so, I mean, after 20 pages, I feel like, you know what, if this guy doesn't care enough about the craft to at least have somebody else proof it, if he can't proof it, I don't care enough about it to read it. And then when, you know, you read one page and all of a sudden somebody's getting sliced up and eviscerated in the worst possible ways, not for me. So, I do have a film that I hope I will be doing that I can't talk about yet. It's a horror film, but you care about the characters. You get to know them before they start getting knocked off. And there's a story. It's not just, I'm going to kill him and kill him and kill him and kill him.
And then one thing people may not know about you, you were also the voice of Catwoman.
I was the voice of Catwoman.
How did that kind of transition to someone saying, hey, you know, I think you'd be a very good Catwoman?
When Cody was born, my older son, who some of you I think have seen on stage just recently performing in concert with his dad, I didn't want to work full time. And it sort of dovetailed with a voiceover agent from William Morris having heard me on something and contacting me and saying, I think, you know, you've got a great voice, you should be doing voiceovers or commercials or animation and things like that. Well, the world of commercials and voiceovers and animation is all controlled pretty much by agents who have a list of clients, and they, you know, the actor goes in and they get the material, the agent gets the material and calls you in to audition. Well, I got a call from my voiceover agent one day saying, you know, we've got an audition for you. Come in and read for Catwoman. 30-second audition. Just put it on tape. Walk away. I'd never watched the cartoon. I knew her as a kid because I grew up listening to her sing Armenian music and Turkish songs. I don't think I'd ever heard Lee. I don't know. Julie Newmar.
Yeah.
I just went in and said the lines the way I thought Catwoman would sing. And about a month later, I got a call saying, you know, they want you to do Catwoman, which was great. I had done other animation. I had done individual cartoons. I think I'd probably done Scooby-Doo's on the Island by then, and some cartoons. I'm not a brilliant animation voice like, who's the girl that, she does one of the Powerpuff Girls, and she was one of the girls of Gotham.
Tara
And
Strong?
we recorded together.
Tara Strong.
Tara, yes. I mean, there are people who can come in and, you know, there are 30-year-old women who can come in and give you a 4-year-old boy with a cold, and I think that's just brilliant. Or a dog, you know, and, but they call me for the queens and the, you know, the witches and for Batman. And then that led to, then the video game market started snowballing, and I've done the ones that were fun that I've just started doing in the last 5 years, I guess, were the ones that were mocap. I did Halo 4 was mocap, and Mad Max is mocap. Those are fun too.
Questions?
First of all, I just want to say you're awesome and you're one of my favorite voice actors.
Thank you.
And I have a question, which is, are you going to do any more voice acting in the future or no?
I am if they're going to hire me. I'd love to. We audition for them all the time, you know. I just auditioned for a couple of games just right before I got right before I drove up here. So if they want me, I'd love to do it.
Back.
We just came in a short while ago. What do you do in your spare time?
In my spare time, well, up until this year, I had 2 boys who were soccer players. Still on a club soccer team in high school. Now they've both gone off to college. So my spare time now is flying to the various colleges to watch the games there. But I love to read. I read nonstop. And I go to soccer games for the kids. And I've got 2 dogs that have to be walked twice a day. And then when I'm not acting, I'm writing. My publisher is asking for a 4th in the vampire series. I don't know if I'll do that or not, but pretty much I don't cook anymore. I used to cook. But then everybody started eating something different and it was not fun, you know, so we order in a lot. But pretty much just, you know, I like to, do I say I like to work out? I exercise.
Yeah, because you still pretty much look the same.
I try to keep, you know, I enjoy it. I mean, if a couple days go by and I haven't, I mean, I'm always walking the dogs, but I like to just do a little physical activity. My mom was 81 when she died. She was still taking exercise class and going to swimming and, you know, yeah. And I have a 101-year-old aunt who doesn't walk quite so well anymore. She needs a walker, but she's just as sharp as a tack and still cooking and doing everything. I think some of it is just hereditary.
And you see an actress like Betty White going until
Yeah.
the 90s?
Listen, I have a friend, well, I don't know her mom, but I know the daughter. She just did 3 episodes, I think in the last 2 seasons, of Ray Donovan. And I just looked her up on IMDb. She's going to be 104. Connie Sawyer. So, you know, I'm looking at that and I'm thinking, I mean, I got boys in college, so I'm going to keep working just for no other reason than somebody's got to pay the tuition, you know. But I love working. I mean, I just like the action of it, the creativity of it, you know, accomplishing something.
Escape from New York is one of my favorite films growing up. Can you talk a little bit about that and like working on it?
My favorite part, as I said earlier, was just being on the set with Donald Pleasance. I mean, he was just hysterical. It was a fun shoot for me because I didn't have to suffer the way the guys did. It was all shot at night, most of it, in St. Louis. In the, well, it was the summer. The pavement, I don't know if you've read any of John's interviews, but the pavement at one point was like 100 degrees and the guys were dropping off the helicopter and breaking their ankles because the pavement was so bushy, you know, from the heat. And they were working really hard at night. But I just had the pleasure of getting to work with all of them. And most of my stuff, the stuff with Brain, was at the USC library. And so that was a controlled atmosphere. And what do I remember? I remember we got to St. Louis and we checked into the hotel, which was downtown St. Louis, and this was in 1982, 81. St. Louis looked like that. It was a ghetto. A lot of it had been burned out, and that bridge was, was not in use anymore. But we checked into the hotel, and they told us not to walk around the neighborhood because it was dangerous. So Donald walked out the front door and hailed a cab to take him around to the back door where the restaurant was. I don't think he knew it was that close, but we all laughed at that, you know. I'm trying to remember something specific, and I can't. Except that, I can tell you an escape story that you might know if you've read anything from John writing or in my book, but John put the movie together, and Maggie's work ended when I was firing at the Duke. And he had a screening. And I've just recently been told by someone that what's J.D., is it J. Abrams? J.J. Abrams was a young, you know, he's not 19 at that time, but his father, for some reason, I don't know what his father's association was with John, but his father was at the screening with J.J. And when they finished watching the movie, the story I was told is that JJ, I think, raised his hand and said, but what happened to Maggie? I mean, we really don't know. Did she survive? Did she not survive? And based on those questions, we went back to our house, pulled the cars out of the driveway, out of the garage. I put the costume on again. I boiled another turkey so I could get the breastbone, which is what I had used for a hair clip, and laid me down on the cement of the garage and got some fake blood, put it around my head, and John shot that last image of Maggie dead. So I owe the fact that I didn't get to do a sequel to J.J. Abrams.
Well, let's give a hand for Adrienne.